Thank you all for still being here. Obviously, we've got drinks afterwards, so you made the right choice to stay. I'm Debbie Laycock, and I head up the policy team in Terence Higgins Trust, and I have the privilege of chairing this final session. And obviously, it's the best panel of the day. Lots of beautiful people. So, starting at the end, we have Jim McManus, who is Director of Public Health at Hearts, and he's come today from another AGM, so has heard a bit of stuff happening today, but it'd be great to have your experience. Marion from NAS. We have Winnie, who is a consultant but been working in the HIV sector for many, many years. Rob, to my right here, is Deputy Chief Executive of the LGBT Foundation. All these faces will be familiar. We have Will, who's been working at the forefront of PrEP with PrEPSTAR and is also at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And Michael Brady, who has many hats, so works for Terence Higgins Trust and also at King's. So in the session today, I'd like to make sure that we have as much discussion from you guys out there as possible. But I wanted to kind of start, so I found today really interesting. I think there seems to be a lot of excitement in the room. We're at a bit of a tipping point when it comes to prevention, maybe MSM. It would be grand to have some conversations about women as part of this as well. But also some frustration possibly in the room as well. So I first of all wanted to ask each panelist, what's the first thing or what's the best thing that you would take away from today? So whether that is a very positive thing, something you've heard in the session today, and maybe also to think, we will have another conference, whether it's this conference or PHE or another. How do we make sure that we're not in the same room with the same people saying the same things in 2 years' time? So is there anything else we need to do differently? I might start with Michael. If that's okay.
Oh, right, thanks. Just didn't even get me a tune. Okay, so the best things. I'm going to be glass half full, as is my one. One is just the range of people here, colleagues and people who I don't know. So I think the passion that still brings us out here to try and push things forward and build on the excitement that Valerie said, was talking about this morning in terms of seeing the beginning of that potential tipping point in terms of combination prevention. Personally, I went to a really good session. I could only get into it halfway through, which was around innovative approach to outreach, and particularly to online outreach through social media. And I think it's important for us to keep in mind the full range of impactful ways of engaging with people who are at risk of HIV, and some of those sort of innovative and on paper can look expensive in the awful what's the bang for my buck world can get lost. So that face-to-face focused with those who are most at risk, keeping that on the table and as part of our offer is really important. So that's my take home.
Mike just said glass half full. I think right now I feel like I want to push the glass over. There's some really good news that's come out of the conference. Like Val's data this morning is something that we should be really proud of. We should be really celebrating that. I'm an old hack. I've worked in this sector for at least 25 years, and at every conference someone says there's going to be some good news, and I think this is probably the first time I've been at one of these when there is some really genuine good news that we should all be amazingly proud of. Ian this morning talked about leadership. He talked about the benefits of us all working together. And I think in the last 18 months, we've seen a really good emerging leadership coming from people like Ian at THT and the board at THT, and people like Debbie and Yusuf at NAT. And I'm really proud of that happening. And that's a really refreshing new leaf to have seen. So congratulations for those people who've been part of that. But the thing that makes me want to push the glass over was Kat's presentation from NAT, and I feel so depressed by the data that we saw, by such huge government cuts. We've seen halving of the national HIV program. We've seen local authority public health budgets absolutely decimated. And for me, that's reflected in some of the conversations that have happened today and in some of what I see around the room. And we've just come out of a session talking about PrEP and asking questions about why PrEP isn't being picked up and seen more by black gay men and by women and trans people. And it feels like we've been having these conversations for the last 20 years or more. And that's why I feel frustrated, and that's why I feel really unhappy with where we are as a sector. And I'm going to leave that there because I think we'll probably build on that a little bit more as we go along.
Thanks, Will. I mean, I'm definitely happy to build on that one. I think that the thing that I've really took from today actually is about the innovation that's out there. Fantastic innovation. And my frustration, and I'll carry the analogy on in terms of the, throwing the glass over, is about the speed of change. The speed of change. We've got the innovation out there. We've got the passion out there. We know what works. We've got the evidence. We need to be responding to the HIV epidemic quicker, faster, much better. And I think that, I also think it was really striking in terms of the presentation that the National AIDS Trust gave, and some of the figures in there were really startling in terms of the scale of the cuts. And if that level of cuts continue, then actually we're going to see a growing crisis within the UK in terms of funding for voluntary organisations, and that will make a direct impact upon the quality of life of people living with HIV. So I think that one of the things that we need to do is lobby very strongly as a sector. And when I'm talking about sector, I don't just mean the voluntary sector, I mean the people that are in this room that are really passionate about this cause. And I also think that, I suppose one of the things that I'd like to see a bit more of, I guess, is about that diversity of voices. I think about, members of the trans community, for example, and how we can make sure that their voices are stronger within this agenda. I also think about, we've had some very powerful voices today about the needs in terms of like women living with HIV and BME communities as well. I think getting that diversity of voices is really important.
Yeah, I'd like to echo a little bit of what Will said about working together, about leadership, about partnership, and also what Dawn from the Big Lottery Fund said this morning. I think some of those things we know already, but it's really good to continue to hear some of this. And I do, like Will, feel that there's genuine partnerships out there now as we move in the HIV response. I also would like to echo some of what you just said. I sorry, I forgot your name right now. About the diversity of voices. We need more of that, and to see that happen. But what is also very frustrating for me, somebody just came up to me after the last session. I won't disclose who they are. And they said that they felt that PrEP was just for MSM and not for anybody else. And I just confirmed with what I said in the previous session, that that's what the media was putting out there, the print media, everybody. And she thought she was going nuts, but I just proved that that's what many people out there are thinking. So we need to reevaluate our strategies in terms of how we communicate information within our communities, and to talk to other people, not just us, the usual suspects, to open up this sort of community here and talk to other people, especially those who need to access PrEP.
The glasses are ready on the floor. The thing is, when you spill things, okay, you are going to trip or you'll have to go round. And I feel in some ways we're going round in circles. So I remember being at this conference a couple of years ago, still speaking around equity and equality for different voices, for minority communities, for trans communities. I think there has been, and we do need to recognize that the leadership in the last couple of years has changed. And I do want to publicly say thank you to Ian around purposely going out to reach out to different communities, and the leadership of Deborah Gold. But also Michelle at Clinic Q has batted for trans people in a way that we haven't seen in a consistent way. And if we need more trans voices, they need to be on the panel. I think one of the challenges that we need to face that's very real is around what do we do with a reoccurring decibel. So if we have a situation where the good news is around a reduction in HIV acquisition for the first time, and it's exciting, we also need to be very clear around who is not accessing those medications. and what needs to be done. And I think a key thing that we often talk about but don't bat forward is around, so how do we enable communities to take that forward themselves? So here's my thing. If you want to not be here in 2 years' time talking about the same thing, change the way we do things. Let's see more leadership. Let's recognize that the funding required and the skill set required to reach different groups is not the same. You cannot, it's not a quick kind of growth acquisition where you cut and paste what you do with MSM to other communities. We know it doesn't work. So let's talk about what does work. Let's look about scaling our ambitions outside of the sexual health sector, because ironically, HIV is one of the few conditions that other conditions can learn from, right? But we're all from the sector. Why? We should be talking to other people. And I think finally, it's around, how do we say goodbye? With NAS, we've tried to grow in the last 5 years, not because we want to be the biggest. NAS shouldn't be 25 years saying the same things. Where is the BMA voice? I'd like not to sit here in the next 2 years, not because NAS isn't relevant, but somebody else would have picked up the battle, enabled people from the communities to lead the debate, and actually execute their own work. That, for me, looks like how you get rid of me in 2 years, and that feels good.
Thank you, Jim.
I've probably come quite late. I've only been here for about an hour because all the directors of public health in the UK have been having our annual general meeting today. And my job is to represent their interests. And one of the things that the public health minister, former public health minister, always said is she can't get a single voice out of the public health world because we're all saying different things. We can't agree as a network of public health agencies something to say. And from what I've seen in the last hour, I think there is an issue here about what is the case that we are trying to make and to whom are we making it. I've read this. I don't disagree with a single recommendation in it. Are we going to be able to do it? I don't know. I think there is innovation. There is also quite a lot of conflict. And in terms of moving forward, I would like to suggest 5 priorities for us as a movement. The first, I think, is to actually consider and agree what you have to offer to the rest of the health and social care world. In 1984, I bored people at the King's Fund conference with this. There was a book called Productive Living Strategies for People with HIV. We desperately need that wisdom in the world of long-term conditions because, let's face it, the NHS and social care is bankrupt. Secondly, I think you need to agree what case we want to say. Thirdly, prioritise what it is you're saying and how. And is that about risk? Is that about outcome? Is that about quantum of money? I think quantum of money will get us nowhere in this environmental climate. Most directors of public health are actually looking at a cumulative cut of around 33% when you add in the financial cliff that local authorities and SDPs and the public health cuts together are facing. It's not 9%, it's about 33%. That changes the debate that we have to be engaging in. And then I think advocate for joined up systems. We all need to be filling the inboxes of senior decision makers and policy makers, particularly when we have what I think is a complete vacuum in national leadership from government on HIV policy. We all have to be advocating. And then I think the final thing is just to keep on at it.
Thank you, guys. Okay, I want to open it up for questions, comments, your thoughts from today before, or anything you want to ask the panel. And have we got some roving mic people anywhere? Oh, Taki. Any questions anybody had or any thoughts from today? You're all so quiet. Stunned into silence. Okay, we'll just keep on thinking about some questions. Will, I have one for you. So I have been so impressed with the response to PrEP, the response to that you guys and others in the room have done, and there feels like, I think Carrie said earlier, a real resurgence in activism, especially around HIV and sexual health. And what's your experience of that been, and how can we make sure that continues into the future?
So one of the questions we were asked in preparation for this is, where might we want to be in 2 years' time, to reflect on 2 years into the future? And actually what I want to do is to reflect 2 years back in a way of trying to answer this question. So a number of us were at this conference 2 years ago when the Minister for Public Health was in the room, and she was one of those people who was responsible for massive local authority cuts, but also responsible for a huge, absolutely disproportionate cut of the National HIV Prevention Programme. And what struck me in that room was the silence from all of us, the lack of anger, the lack of maybe shouting down, and we all sat here and we all took it. And I walked out of that conference feeling hugely dispirited and wondering why we were all so silent, why there were no raised voices, and why we all just let those cuts happen with no collaborative voice of dissent or anger. And for me, that was the tipping point in setting up Prepster. I looked at the sector that I had left behind and had decided to partially rejoin, and felt that our activism, our anger, our advocacy had completely dissipated. And thanks to a handful of other people, I managed to turn that frustration into something that I think many of us have now used for change. So Debbie, when you ask me about a resurgence of activism, I agree. Over the last 18 months, I think we've seen amazing collaboration, amazing activism, and now as a result of that, we are seeing things change. But I'm still really concerned about what Jim's just referred to as a lack of one voice, that we have a vacuum in our national leadership on HIV prevention and HIV policy. And I wonder from today what we might do collaboratively to reinvigor some of that momentum around our advocacy and some of our anger. And as more cuts happen, I wonder if as a sector we've now become really timid of raising our voices and becoming activists because of what our funders may or may not do as a result of that. I wonder if we've collectively forgotten that advocacy sits very centrally in the Ottawa Charter of Health Promotion, and that for me, being an activist, raising a voice, getting out on the streets is as important as HIV health promotion as just about any other activity. And I wonder as a sector if we've forgotten how we train and capacity build our colleagues, our peers, our staffs, our team, our organisations, so that activism is seen as something that's a legitimate part of what we could and should be doing. And I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you. I wanted to come to you, Rob, because you were at the forefront of so many changes happening in Manchester. I just like leading the way, complete service redevelopment and redesign, a new mayor. I just wanted to know sort of what's your experience have been of the way things are changing, and if you've got any advice to us in other areas of the country where this is happening.
Well, I think that I mean, the first thing I'd say, of course, is that although there's loads of exciting things happening in Greater Manchester, there's also lots of exciting things happening in other parts of the country, and I think it's about kind of how we learn from each other from different parts. There is a particular interest in Greater Manchester at the moment, which is brilliant. Obviously the devolution agenda, and we've now got the new mayor in terms of Andy Burnham, and that creates a lot of political opportunities, I think, in terms of one of the words we've used quite a lot today on the panel is about leadership, and actually leadership coming from different places. So we're kind of fairly early days in terms of progress. One of the things we have been able to do in Greater Manchester is to create an ambition around ending all new cases of HIV within a generation, and that's something that I think hopefully nationally you'll hear a lot more about over the next few months. And the way we've done that is to make sure that that ambition around ending all new cases of HIV within a generation is within the transformation plans, which is a real success story, because the reality is that HIV is an issue that is competing with many other issues to get that kind of oxygen of space, if you like, in terms of raising the profile of it. So I think that's one of the things in terms of devolution, gives the opportunity to raise the profile of HIV. I think that the complexities of it that I'm learning is that one of the things that's absolutely key is about finding those key supporters, those key influences, those advocates, whether that's community advocates, but also kind of supportive directors of public health and other people in the system that can make change. And actually, sometimes you don't need many people to make a big change in life. If you look at the work that that Will and Greg and many others have done in terms of Prepster, for example, that's a small group of really passionate people that have actually made a huge change. So I think that's one of the lessons I've took, is about find those people that are passionate about the issue on a local basis, on a devolution basis, grab hold of them and get them to make a difference.
Let them go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Has anybody got any other thoughts? Anything, questions? Yes, up there. Thanks, Ben. We have to run upstairs, sorry.
It was just on sort of like the subject of regionality. Looking at some of the figures we saw before, we're all patting ourselves on the back for a reduction in HIV diagnosis in MSM, but that's in clinics that are very London-centric. And I think we just need to be very aware that there's other organisations like Yorkshire MESMAC, like LGBT Foundation. We don't work in London, and we don't want to be affected by, oh, it's fine, the problem's going away, when actually in our areas, the problem is the same that we faced last year. And I understand this idea of one voice, but we need to be very careful, because we all have different priorities in different areas. And the one voice for an MSM community in London is very different from a BME community in Hull. So,
thank you.
Can I come back on it?
Yep.
I think I wasn't meaning that we should say exactly the same thing, but I think there is an issue about speaking as a sector with one voice to government about the need for continued nuanced funding, appropriate policy, appropriate research, and for efforts to continue this. It would be foolish to assume that the solution, even in Hertfordshire, a county which has extremes of wealth and poverty and extremes of rural and urban across 37 settlements, would be anything like the same strategy as you could adopt in inner city London. It just would be foolish, and even more so anywhere else in the UK. HIV prevention in Cornwall is an order of magnitude of difference from HIV prevention in Birmingham, for example. But I think that is the core part of our job, to articulate the nuance as well as the consistent messages. And one of the problems is, I don't think, A, we have a lack of national leadership at policy level from government, and B, we have a lack of clear, consistent, as well as nuanced messages from the sector. And that's a crisis. And I think the opportunity for us is either we get despondent and angry, or we say, right, we are going to do what we can, and we're going to do what we can together. And I'd much rather do that.
Can I just pick up on the point of one voice? And while I completely agree with you around lack of leadership at a political will, I'm challenged by this idea that there is this one voice. There isn't a one voice. What I'm concerned about, if I might be really, really frank, is the fact that when we look at HIV and a reduction in acquisition, especially in Black African communities, that has not happened because we got the sexual health promotion right, in my books, right? And I know a number of you share that view. When we look at the potential to reduce HIV in MSM groups, that is because we started to think strategically. It is because it was nuanced. It is because people took themselves and said, I want to bat for this. But if we're going to talk about nuanced messages, let's be clear. When we're talking about late diagnosis, we are talking about a persistency within Black African communities that has not had the same level of funding, that has not had the nuanced messages, and that had not had the thought leadership. If we're going to make a systematic change, we need to own that. When we're talking about late diagnosis, we would then be looking at places like Milton Keynes and Stas, who get a small percentage of the funding from this program, but have a 72% late diagnosis rate for the last 5 years. So my point is, it's good to say that we're one sector. We fight the same battle, but let us be clear on what the priorities are, and let us make sure that each group affected by HIV has the same level of opportunity to access funding, to access support, to access interventions.
Thank you. Michelle. No, Taki. First of all, sorry, Michelle had her hand up earlier. And then I'll come back to you.
I just want to pick up on a point that Marion mentioned earlier. Thank you for saying what you did about trans voices.
Go, girl.
I'm gonna. Okay. And I think for me, it's about demonstrating the inclusion of diversity. It's one thing saying include trans voices, but do it. Don't just say it. I don't know who's trans on the panel, but my sense is there's not. Okay. I've been involved in HIV for 30 years soon, and for 20 years of that time, I focused on cis gay men, cis gay and bisexual men. 10 years ago, I started focusing on trans people, my own community, which I had not been doing. People started to turn their backs on me. People closed doors because now I was talking about trans people. Activism is keep on doing it. Don't give up.
Ben, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for your insights. I was just wondering how we can reduce the variability in healthcare workers that we represent or are associated with. You know, we ask every healthcare worker to have an annual basic life support certificate, but we don't ask all our healthcare workers to have basic literacy in what HIV is, how it can be easily prevented, how it can be treated effectively. And I just don't think we're consistent in the messages. I think a lot of the stigma and the problems come from the healthcare systems and how they approach prevention. I'm just wondering, what could we do to really ensure that every single GP practice and secondary care hospital are all on the same page and they know the basic facts, and we can actually then articulate a single message across the whole healthcare system, because that's where the touch points are with so many members of the communities. Just a thought. I was just wondering what the rest of the panel would think.
Michael, I always put you on the spot.
I don't have the answer to that, but I'm glad you raised it. I think it touches on a point that Marion made earlier, which is about we need to stretch outside of our community. You know, people, there are already, you know, we can look at the stigma index, you know, experiences of appalling stigma and discrimination for people living with HIV, and that is only going to get worse unless we're able to try and do something about it, as more and more people need more general health care or care homes or social care services, because the specialist services have been decommissioned, and it's a massive gap. So I think, you know, it remains that something that we need to have on our agenda under the broadest umbrella of tackling stigma and supporting people to live well and live long with their HIV. And you're right. And I think, you know, we start to chip away at some of those things with some of the partnerships we have with the Royal College of General Practitioners, and it's great to see a few GPs here. You know, it's those things, it's those initial partnerships that hopefully will chip away at the bigger healthcare. But you're right. Once people step outside of our world, it's still quite dark there sometimes.
Thank you. Jim, did you want to?
I think we have to, you know, we all have to take some responsibility for this. Have allowed HIV to slide off the agenda as a quality issue and a stigma issue. And my colleagues from Hertfordshire are here, but they will know in detail the bloody big fight actually I've been having with dentists about getting dentists for people with HIV. Avedis Donabedian, who was the founder of Quality in Health and Social Care, described quality as an exercise in love. And I like to believe that people go into health and social care for love, but actually I think the system, in the health and social care system, hurts people, and they hurt people in turn. So for me, it's a more complex thing. I think it will see me out to the rest of my life to advocate for good quality, loving, respectful care for people with HIV and for every single person in the county I serve, but also actually the same respect for health and social care workers. It's interesting, in Hertfordshire we've just opened 2 brand new sexual health clinics designed by the staff who work in them. That's despite £1 million going out of the sexual health budget. And the staff morale, as well as the patient feedback, has gone up significantly. It is something about respect and love and continually emphasising that. And I do think it is as basic as that, but that's a lifelong agenda.
Thanks, Jim. Taki, there is a gentleman just in front.
Thank you very much. There have been a lot of interesting, encouraging information that's come up today. But whilst we're celebrating that HIV, if it's caught early, you can have a normal life expectancy. But there's something that I just want to, which I did not hear today, maybe I might have missed it, but it seems there is no emphasis on putting HIV as a chronic illness. Because when we talk of long-term conditions, we are talking of diabetes, we are talking of stroke, we are talking of heart attacks, we are talking of COPD. As a GP myself, we are not putting HIV as a chronic illness. And the other thing, that the mere fact that HIV is treated in a sexual health clinic, as a GP, I'm being de-skilled, but I'm the one who will be dealing with this patient on a day-to-day basis. He only goes every 3 months or every 6 months to the sexual health clinic. But me, as the GP who's looking after this person, I don't know what to do. If this patient is now 70 years old, 75, 80 years old, how do I deal with this person? That is a gap that is happening. We don't have to wait. We have to be proactive and start equipping GPs. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody want to come back around LTCM in primary care? Jim.
So I lead 2 programs of work for the STP. I'm not quite sure what I did to deserve that, but and we are rubbish at long-term condition management in this country all across the board. You know, our best rates for diabetes are about 78% in England, and if you have an foot amputation with diabetes, there's a 60% chance you'll be dead within 5 years. That's appalling, when we allegedly, according to the OECD, have the best outcomes of any healthcare system in the world. So let's not kid ourselves that actually any aspect of healthcare is done really brilliantly, wonderfully well in the UK and can't be improved. For me, it's about articulating what can be done across agenda. If you have someone with a long-term health condition, I think as a GP, the things we'd like GPs to do are manage them and monitor them, get them to manage and monitor themselves, get them into social prescribing and independence and various other things, and do that regardless of the condition, and understand the basics and learn that the dialogue with the patient is as important in managing the person clinically as it is actually in empowering the patient to live and be the expert in their care. We don't do that. Where could HIV, which is the area of survival par excellence if you're not late diagnosed, and even now with late diagnosis it's been improved, where could HIV teach the rest of the healthcare system those things? Are we doing it? No. Why are we not doing it? I don't know. But actually, we need to start making connection with the rest of the healthcare system and the rest of the social care system, because otherwise we really are in deep trouble.
Thank you. Anybody else? Was there a question down here, Taki? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lillian Dowler, and I feel like a lonely voice here. I live in Kent, specifically in Canterbury, and I was just filling in the evaluation form and realized Kent was not on the list, but Wales was. So I really feel like a lonely voice here. But I just wanted to raise issues around HIV in Kent. It's a low prevalence area, and I think it's very much overlooked. But the issue of late diagnosis is what we're hearing for most of the clinics there. But there's no awareness. There's nothing that's happening within the community. There are very small organizations like mine, which is a year old, which started because we felt that the Africans who were living in Kent, specifically East Kent, did not have anything to go to. Yet, from the clinics, we're hearing that they are the second largest group, as they are elsewhere in the community. And most of the issues are around late diagnosis. But I feel that maybe, I don't know what the policy is with HIV prevention in England around low prevalence areas, because I just feel that because it's low prevalence, it's not taken as a priority. And some of the things that are seen as innovative in Kent might be things that you've done maybe 10 years back, but because we are 20 years back in Kent as far as HIV prevention and awareness is concerned, some of those things might not be as innovative as you think. So I'm just making a plea for Kent as a whole. East Kent, I know more about than West Kent because I live there, but I just feel that there is need for thoughts to be put in actually helping some of those communities that are striving. I have worked with gay men in East Kent. As an African woman, it's been quite difficult to be able to access them. However, now there isn't any support in the community because the group that was working with them has no funding anymore. So there is a big, big gap. And this is coming from the HIV clinic in Canterbury. So I was just making a plea for Kent and just for people to remember that, yes, there are people living with HIV in Kent. A lot of them come to London for the services, and I'm sure you know the people who are looking at that statistics have seen them, because we've known so many people who are coming to London instead of going to Kent because they feel that the services in Kent are not good enough.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Anybody? Thank you. I think that's a great point, and I think it's looking at the diversity and the different needs of different areas, whether it's high and low prevalence and rurality as well. So I know we're talking about England, but we do loads of work in Wales, and it's really interesting to see the needs and how we can do HIV prevention in rural areas. Did anybody have any other questions, thoughts? Thanks, Ben.
Sorry. My name is Nelson Anti, Ashton Plus Foundation, Luton and London. We have all gathered here because of the HIV. The fight of the HIV in the community is not easy. And what I've heard today, it tells me that it needs collaborative effort to fight. And one thing also that is made it difficult is because of funding. And when you go to the community, the smaller organization, we are doing our best. But sometimes the funding is not there. When you put in the application, being the smaller organization, sometimes you turn down your application. So what can we do to support the smaller organization? Action Plus Foundation started in London since 1997. And I can say that we are the organization that organizes community testing in a church in London. But sometimes when it comes to funding, that's where we are. We don't get it. So what can we do to support the smaller organization to fight the menace of HIV in their community?
Thank you very much. Well, if we take this lady's question as well, and then we'll answer them both as a tacky. Thank you.
I want to ask the whole panel, is it, because lots of people are doing lots of very good work all over the country, is it time that there's just another national TV campaign?
So say again, Chris.
Is there time there? Is it time there was actually another national TV campaign aimed at the whole country?
Thank you. Panel, who wants to do so? A question around funding and around a national TV campaign.
Shall I speak to funding?
Fabulous.
I think I hear your pain, and when when I came to NAS 5 years ago, I walked into one funder and he said, I'm not going to give you any money because we think it's going to close, right? I think you need to be persistent, but I also think that funders and commissioners need to be a bit more flexible. You've got bigger organisations that can provide the scale, they can write bids really well and the opportunity. One of the challenges, I think, is that when they have an opportunity to work with smaller organisations, sometimes the relationship isn't as smooth. I would like to see more funding for organisations for yourselves, and especially the Kent one. What will be really interesting is in 2 years' time, if one of us try and work in Kent when you already exist. So I think there's a really strong case for collaboration, but I would invite you to go and speak to people. I think people are very amenable nowadays. I remember Lisa Powell's sitting out there. I remember going to her when I first started at NAS saying, I can't do certain things. She said, sit here, told me what to do, was persistent. I've spoken to Ian, I've spoken to a number of people. This is a great networking opportunity, but ultimately you are going to be the one that changes that dial. Nobody is going to write you a check. Be persistent, have some brilliant ideas, and don't be afraid to fail. We're not pretending we've got all of the ideas. We're saying that we think we know how to reach the community. Back us, and let's see if we can write up that intervention.
I mean, just to add to that, I mean, it's fantastic. I do international development work, and I go to some of the most poor areas in sub-Saharan Africa, and there are organizations, and I know the context is different, but there are organizations there doing so much with so little money. That whenever I come back here and somebody says there's no funding, I feel ashamed, because I feel the money is there, but we have to unlock those doors where the money is, and we have to find new ways to do that. You know, I do also think that we have to find a way in terms of our messaging, and I'm moving away a little bit from answering your question. But for instance, the work that we do in African communities, the targeted work, when we go there, we say, this is a challenge, there are undiagnosed infections, there's this, there's a lot of HIV in African communities, and many people shy away from this targeted work. We need to find a different way of addressing this and go work in these communities with information like, we are here not because you are a challenge, but because you are part of the solution. Yes. And we want to hear from you.
Yeah, just a quick couple of comments really. I mean, I think both questions actually, in terms of the, your question in terms of the work that you can do on a local level, and also your question about, in terms of like a TV campaign. There's a link there in terms of money actually, because a TV campaign obviously is really expensive as well. So I think that one of the things is about, I suppose the image it's almost in my mind is like a snowball effect of like starting small and actually things can grow. So if you look at a lot of voluntary and community organisations, for example, actually many voluntary and community organisations, started from a very small place, and actually it's about going from that place, about looking at the community assets that you've currently got, the skilled and talented people. You're obviously very motivated in terms of making a difference, and lobbying really, and looking at ways in which you can kind of like maybe link with other organisations to try and put funding bids in. And I think there's absolutely a responsibility for bigger organisations to have a and I include the LGBT Foundation in this, in terms of looking in the mirror and asking themselves that question about what more can we do to support small organisations. I think that the thing with the TV campaign as well is that the more opportunities that we've got to promote HIV and the importance of that message, the better. I think that one of the things is about using all the different channels of communications we've got about, we live in a world now, don't we, where there's kind of a 1 minute, 2 minute video and stuff, and the internet and stuff. And I think that the more I think that's really important. I also think that face-to-face work that we do is still really critical. And I guess that's the bit that worries me a little bit about the report that National AIDS Trust gave today, because I think that, I think testing is really important. I think testing is really important, but I think there's a bit of a danger that we might start to lose sight of that, the importance of that one-to-one intervention, that face-to-face stuff.
Thank you. Taki, the lady just there, and then... Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Beatrice from Positivist, and my point is related to what Winnie has just said about targeted work. And a lot of, interesting enough, we're talking about, I've been working in the HIV sector for over 20 years. At the moment, my team focuses on prevention work in African communities. And it's very shocking that up to today, when you go out to talk to people, they're still unaware of the basic facts around HIV. And I've been asking myself questions, but when Winnie said today about the targeted work, I think by doing that, while it's a good thing, or seemingly a good thing, it has good intentions, but the repercussions are actually the reverse. When we go out, the number of times people show negativity on seeing black images, it puts them off finding out about the facts. You won't believe it, we're talking about PrEP today, and I thought, okay, PrEP is a wonderful opportunity for us to revisit the prevention messages, but with a new approach. This business of like having black images on their own, or gay men, kind of puts people off. Maybe it works for the gay society, but I know it doesn't work for my people. That's why people don't know the facts about HIV. When you talk about PEP, they don't know about it. So now we're talking about PrEP. It's even more alien. They don't know about TASP. So we need to readdress that if we're going to have a very effective communication that's going to build the impact that it has. And also something else that I noticed when we're giving the data, I didn't see data. My organization does a lot of community testing, and I didn't see data that comes out of that. When we actually engage with the people, we don't just do a prick and take a result for the HIV test. It's an opportunity to discuss to have a comprehensive discussion around sexual health, which is very effective. And we use it to address all the various issues that are concerned. But at the moment, I was also seeing that there is a lot of money being put into, while I'm not against self-sampling kits, that one-to-one, most of the time people say, I don't want that, I'd rather have a discussion with you. So it shouldn't be either or, but it should all be used in a comprehensive way, and everything supporting everything else. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Sara Paparini. I'm a researcher. I've been doing research on HIV for about, 12, 13 years now. I think it's lots of interesting things I've heard today. One is Jim mentioned how we left HIV slip off the agendas and equality issue. And I think that sometimes what I've been observing all these years is that there is this world of medicine and clinics, and then there is this world of politics. And the medicine and the clinics might be one and the same, serving everybody because of the NHS and because medicines supposedly don't discriminate. But the politics in this country for the two most affected groups are quite different. And I think that it's a question of how we can recognize that HIV is a political issue. It's not just a health issue, and that the late diagnosis is affects particular people for political reasons, it's not just a health problem. PrEP can help people in a very direct way, but it needs to be linked to the politics of PrEP and what happens to people who will take PrEP. So I think what Will is saying and what a lot of us are saying is that there are very nuanced politics to be had here, but there's also a question of how HIV can always teach us to fight for a kind of equal access, rights, well-being, and so on. And the solutions to HIV problems, and many of them we have for prevention and for treatment, are often medical and clinical. Those are tools, but they come within a context in which there are social determinants such as poverty, gender-based violence, homophobia, racism, and we can go on, transphobia, all these issues. And the more we look at solutions narrowly, they give us these results in the immediate term, but how are they sustainable without a broader political discussion? So I would urge these conversations to become more about power imbalances in funding because of maybe stratification, racism, immigration, homophobia. We need to be talking about these issues, which are the issues that HIV always points to. That's what's kind of always coming up behind whatever we say. Clinical solutions are one manifestation of the NHS. But as we see with PrEP, if there isn't a political will to fund something that might help gay men have pleasurable sex without condoms, then PrEP is not going to be funded. Of course, it's a money issue, but it's never only a money issue. So it's a political issue again, and some people have arranged to sort it out for themselves. But that speaks to the fact that the NHS will not be able going forward to provide the equality that we are talking about, and that probably we all need. So that was my point, to just be more political, I guess.
Thank you. Philippa, did you still want to? Ben's just behind you.
Thanks. Another angle, a very healthcare practitioner's angle on destigmatization, is to integrate HIV testing with testing for other conditions. And the RCGP and THT are working together on a project called Health Catch-Up, which is going to be offering holistic screening, because there's actually loads of different tests depending on country of origin, ethnicity, age, gender, and various things. And HIV tests will be stitched into that as an offer for absolutely everybody. There'll be an option for home sampling. This is all kind of general practice centred, so it'll be general practice patients. And I think we can actually learn a little bit from Africa on this, that and my understanding is some studies have definitely found that projects that have gone out offering blood pressure checks and cholesterol checks are actually getting better uptake of HIV testing. And there's the additional benefit that when you're referred on, nobody knows what you've been referred on for, and there's a kind of nice masking cloud of activity. And I think that we can learn some lessons from that here. It's then normalising for healthcare practitioners as well as for people alongside all other health conditions that we need to be thinking about and diagnosing.
Thank you very much. We've nearly run out of time. One final thought from each of the panel. Go for your left, Marion.
I wanted to pick up on Beatrice's point because I feel quite strongly about this. I think for a very long time there's been a number of issues surrounding prevention, especially with minority communities. Black African is where we gain the experience, but we also have experience of Latin American communities and Asian communities. And I think the challenge is always going to be, how do we effectively promote a message that affects more than one cohort without people feeling like they're the poster child? I think the reason I feel quite strongly about it is I hear all the thing, especially around African communities, saying, don't stigmatize me, all right? And it's not a but, it's an and. We need to turn the corner on that. So if everything else we're doing has to change, that narrative has to change also. So find ways. So when I first started, people were saying to me, BME communities wouldn't access things on social media, or they wouldn't do something general like the Do It campaign, or they wouldn't do things. Can we just stop saying these are the reasons why we can't? And can we start coming up with reasons why we can? Let's have an Obamaism moment here. Yes, we can. Yes, we can have a TV campaign. And the way we do that is saying that we need a national campaign, because actually stigma is still our biggest problem, not just in healthcare, but across the board. Yes, we can look after smaller organizations by talking to them. Yes, we can raise the bar and say it's not just Africans, it's Latin American communities, it's migrant communities, it's BME communities, it's MSM, and we have a right to access treatment, we have a right to live well, and we can, if we want to, we can. We just can, yes we can.
Thank you. Jim, Winnie, Rob, any final thoughts you want?
Try following that. I think the nature of what mitigates for and against HIV prevention and transmission is increasingly complex, partly due to scientific innovation, partly due to social reality. We need a strategy that is equally as complex and as nuanced. So it is what you've said about the testing pilot. It is what you said about small organisations. It is what you said about trans and other communities. It is all of those. But how do you articulate that in a way that A, mitigates for delivery, so you're not here next year moaning about why we're not moved on, and B, how do you articulate that in a way that actually gets government and politicians to prioritise it, both in, not just in terms of funding, but in terms of making the frameworks that services are delivered in take the necessary action to achieve change.
Thank you. I'm getting the stern Ian Green look, so I think we might have to wrap it up. So I just want to say thank you so much for all of the panel today and all of you for getting involved in the discussion, and passing over to Ian to say to wrap up the end of the day.
You know, I didn't know until then that I had a stern Ian Green look, but hey, I obviously do. Can I just take this opportunity as I started the day to thank everybody who's made a significant contribution to make this such a successful conference. To all those who have been contributors in the plenary sessions and in the workshops, for those who've chaired, for those who've worked behind the scenes, to make this, I think, quite an inspirational event, which we are all going to need to reflect on what we take away from this and how we're going to respond to that. In particular, I want to thank my team at THT, Carrie, Cham, Paul, Taku and Callum, for all the work they've put in to make this such a successful conference, and I would like you to thank them on my behalf as well. To all of you for coming and for your active participation. You can come and be present, but what actually is so important is you actively participate, you engage, you're a thought provoker, and you're a contributor. So thank you for everybody who's contributed today. I would love to be in a position, particularly during this last session, to put in a bottle the passion, the activism, and some of the anger, so that we can then take it out of here and make it a reality in our communities, our organisations, and to those key decision makers. I was reflecting on what Will said just a few minutes ago, is that perhaps we've lost the anger and perhaps we need to regain the anger. I need to reflect on that myself, and also how we all collectively demonstrate leadership. That's absolutely crucial, that all of us have the ability to lead, and how that we coalesce around that shared understanding in different ways of what it means to collectively lead, I think is something also that we need to take away and reflect on. And my good friend Marion, yes we can, and yes we must. Yes we must. So thank you very much for coming. Do please complete your evaluation forms and hand those back in before you leave. And also, it's not over. There is a drinks reception now at the Wesley Hotel, and I do hope to see many of you there. Thank you very much for your time.